If Kazas's tone was even a fraction less enthused, the sight would have fainted me. Still, he left me in shivers and strode to the cliff wall, soundlessly pulling his mythical great hammer from his back. With one effortless blow, he crashed the hammer's head against the stone, eliciting a sharp ring that bounded off the cliff corridors all around us. A passageway opened in response, flinging wide from the impact.
Utterly overzealous, King.
Relsiren was putting on his cloak, the water around his feet turning back to ice as it cooled along with his body. It was then I noticed the obsidian blade stuck in the earth. He retrieved it and with a twirl of artistic routine sheathed it at his waist, bent at an angle.
Merely a knock, General. You are kind to unlock this old gate.
Kazas quickly scanned the cutting cliff tops all around us. Silence did not seem to allay his focus.
How long do we have?
An hour, perhaps. Relsiren nodded at Kazas's hammer.
Be certain to return with your knocker.
Then a line I found most curious.
The Ill Watcher has seen all of this.
Kazas produced a staff from beneath his cloak.
Of that, I was certain.
The staff looked like a simple stick in his hand. He struck it against the rock and the end ignited. His eyes turned to me, and he handed it with fingertips into my open, quivering palm. He then knelt low, hunching before me, yet still much taller.
I warn you now of him we shall soon see, Narian.
His eyes pulled me into his own, overcoming the rising winds that whipped at my face.
No matter how he regards you, his concern is only for himself. Do not forget it.
I nodded vigorously. He turned to Relsiren and whispered,
"A moment,"
then disappeared into the cave. Alone, I stepped toward the Archai. Is this the only way in? I grazed the handle of the opposing door, fingertips sensing the heat. No, Relsiren replied.
But it is for us.
I see. Well, will this dragon be cross when we find it? Coming so late and unannounced?
The snow dragon is nocturnal.
He placed a hand on my shoulder.
And he already knows you are here.
His words again hovered over me.
Right,
I covered.
The Watcher and all that.
I began a chuckle out of uneasiness, really, but his countenance remained as rigid as his skin. Kazas emerged from the passage and beckoned I follow. At this, Relsiren turned his back to the opening and the Dwarf King and I departed into the dark. Despite the torch, or because of it, I kept close to Kazas inside the cave, realizing quickly that the light was for me, as he seemed to have no need for it. For the first time in our journey, I heard the scrape of armor beneath his outer coat, and my throat tightened. The whole place seemed narrow, even for a human. How the large high mortal maneuvered was a testament to his dexterity. Every step was either frozen or wet. The passages were given to a constant inhalation of breezes, piped in from unseen cracks in the mountain crust. I assured myself this was the reason for the often unsettling noises coming up to the myriad of dark passages and tunnels we passed by. Kazas's pace felt like a leash around my waist. He could speak and climb without strain to his voice.
You carry this reputed document with you now, I assume. Tragic to have come all this way, just for our health.
I must have held silent in surprise a bit too long, for Kazas's voice softened.
Narian, if you have spoken to a single good dwarf, you have spoken to me.
I do, sir. My reply was comparably labored. Yes, Kaolian. From the time I received your precise copy of the Accord, I had spent most of every day with it tied around my body, scrolled up in the crook of my back, the twine cinched just below my chest, even as I slept. It was still nestled this way against my spine as we worked through the tunnel, and Kazas inquired no further. And so our journey went, the terrain rarely helpful, but almost never a hindrance. The passage wound, jutted, reversed upon itself, and ceased entirely at times. But in those dead ends, some intrepid explorer had carved out and buttressed an opening, seemingly ages before our ascent. "You know your way well," I commented. "It would fatigue my mind to recall anything in this place."
"I know the way, because I do not rely on my mind,"
he replied. I permitted silence resume, though I could not know it. The travel was nearly complete. Our arrival at the summit was sudden. The thick walls rolled back and our perspective widened immediately. Winds curled like waves beneath a deep ocean squall, whistling and thrumming from beyond our sight. The elevation was imperceptible in the snow gusts, but I could sense the height. Before us was a limitless black that was too dense for the torch to pierce, though in the moments when the winds ebbed, the moonlight cast over the outline of a ruined structure, something like an abandoned altar. Pillars cracked and toppled, the dead holy elements bearing a crosshatch of deep scars. Out from this blinding tempest of wind, snow and torchlight, we were hailed before I could see any sight of what greeted us.
"What draws the mountain shaper up to my meager roost alone?"
The sound of the voice still resonates in my mind, alive and clear, like claws over smooth stones, its word dragged into my ear, clicking melodically, yet they settled like a cart full of ash, dumped all at once and creating their own wake. The cavern roof behind us amplified the speech with the wind, and I felt surrounded by an invisible giant, keeping itself hidden behind the cloak of night and snow. Though in moments I could see an ethereal glow of blue-green flash as lightning within a thunderhead.
"Was the fire sprite not bold enough to join you? Piteous. Or surely a few dwarves would have relished the chance to journey with their father, bringing home tales to pass down through their lines, unless you needed to keep this from them, O King."
If Kazas was amused in the slightest, he suffocated it.
"Perhaps you ought step into the light, for you have miscounted the number before you."
This triggered the beast to good effect. 2 swirls of wind opened suddenly before us, parting the snows like curtains and knocking me to the ground. And through the open veil, the dragon Telnarsis walked toward us, down the steps of the dilapidated altar.
"I have missed nothing, Kazas,"
Telnarsis covered his displeasure.
"Expound upon your purpose, or depart."
I dare say Telnarsis paraded before us a mix of indifference and display. The ground barely recoiled as he moved, each thick leg fully supported by the fingers of the claw, elegant and dreadful. The whitish lower hide bore an inverted crown of spines, which made the fluidity of his body control organic majesty. His upper skin melded into ash grays and near blacks. In the moon-mixed torchlight, it gleamed as though once polished, or liquid thawed and then frozen again. His wings bent up at an angle when closed, in a way I've only seen in the great swans that gather inside the inner courtyard of Heavensong's honor gardens. When open, these flying arms seemed oversized, long and thin, but otherwise beyond compare. For I have never seen another created feature like the wings of a dragon. In his neck was the mesmerizing blue-green light, pulsing softly with his voice. Along his throat, the spines grew in size and keenness. They appeared to be made of clouded ice, and I assumed the beast sharpened them himself, for they looked more like the blades of a dagger than spikes on a serpent. These also ran along his backbone and disappeared behind the crest of his skull, lessening in number but growing in size. I counted 8 or 9, a few with tips broken off. They stood like upright icicles, wide and angled back, giving Telnarsis unnatural sleekness. This recalled the image upon the Archai door, and I thought it admirably accurate, yet incomparable to the reality. His nose was not long, but bore a fitting like a shield upon the tip that was rough and iridescent. The salivary expulsions from his nostrils and mouth crusted or froze. I could not tell in the dimness. As Telnarsis dropped his body and laid down, he let the mountain tremble beneath his weight, signaling disregard. His posture echoed the boredom. In kind, Kazas leaned against the hulking boulder as though it were a common chair.
"We have use of your language,"
the High Mortal began.
"Rather, one of them in particular."
Telnarsis did not even look at us.
Go on,
he managed. Kazas nodded at me with his eyes. I shook my head far too vigorously in acknowledgement. "We are confounded by the dragon Tong Drakelrin, good sir. Good dragon, sir." I fear my head was still nodding. "We desperately seek your counsel for guidance and illumination." Quiet moments passed, and I felt my nerve holding like the breath in my lungs.
"What am I asked to do, Kazas?"
I thought the dragon almost confused, yet he continued otherwise.
"To unwrap the majesty of Drakelrin, to mine the depths of Roxun Sensia's reign, unfurl Rachmydros Vale's twisted impartation, or expound upon Sinvelruthe's fanatical opus, like a common schoolteacher before a class of children."
I withered before his amusement, yet however unwise, I felt a burn to reply. "I am no child, Telnarsis. I am Narian Castigue, a human historian of Havensong, and am working with the Elven Council member Kaelian Greyborn. I have a manuscript which speaks of the great dragon king, Rachnothamos. It is to this end we had hoped that—" At this, the beast stirred. His tail swung over our heads as his feet stamped upon the ruins and his claws dug deeply into the ice. His lungs drunk in the air and heated it, thrusting back out instantly in short, dry puffs. So strong were these gusts that they caught the cold atmosphere and formed man-sized whirlwinds that flashed forward and quickly dissipated.
"This thing around my feet discourages me of you, Kazas. It causes me reflection upon the inconvenience of our pact, and reminds me of my impatient stomach."
Kazas remained in place. He had not moved once from the boulder.
"You have not heard the substance of this request, dragon."
The dragon was disquieted, beginning to pace with rage frothing in his throat.
"I will tolerate one more assent, Kazas. See that you regard the arrogance of this human, or any creature or being that would beg for insight into the transcendence of dragonkind."
His voice melded with the fierce winds and pushed me back in my stance. The light of blue frost in his neck kindled in flickers. As I have sincerely recalled this moment, running it through my heart and mind, I am convinced that had I been alone, I would have fled or tried to flee. Yet Kazas looked upon me as he did at the foot of the cavern, and in some small corner of my heart, I felt safe. Thus I swallowed dryly and explained. "The parchment we have, or I have, appears to be a copy of an ancient agreement
We have been calling it the Dragon Accord, and believe it to explain something of why our peoples have come to inhabit Terminus.
My words did trail off, for during my speech, Telnarsis had utterly transformed before us. It was all happening within his eyes, for which the very first time regarded my own, squinting in the whips of wind and torchlight. The dragon suddenly appeared so singularly regal, and at once I became aware of just how old this planet is, that even the legendary high mortal beside me was preceded by dragonkind.
Tell me of this accord, dear human.
Here the fog deepened, and in a moment I felt Telnarsis' wing dip beneath Kazas and I, slipping me slowly away from the Dwarf King. It was effortless and by design. Telnarsis' tone lessened, lifted, and began again before I responded.
My, but you have come a long way. Surely this incessant cold is wearing you thin. Perhaps I should tender you a fire. For how can two creatures discuss anything of true importance when so much is required of one?
Gently he blew over a large bowl that had been hidden beneath the snows. Whatever element therein caught instantly. The flame was blue and not too hot, bathing the walls of rock and kind. The dragon drew his tail under his jaw like a scarf and rested it down quite fully at my level. Were it not for his overly hospitable tone, I should have screamed.
Now, brave Narian, have you this document fully intact? I should like to give it my rapt attention and read it for myself.
Before I could hint at a response, an enormous hammer fell before my face, severing the cordial air between Telnarsis and myself.
"We're finished here, Narian,"
Kazas rumbled. In what I can only describe as a moment of black, primal terror, I watched as the dragon leapt up on its hind legs, unfurling its wings with a deep, shrieking roar.
No one decides for me, dwarf.
Kazas threw me to the side, almost tossing me into the cave hole we had first exited from. Despite the dragon's raging, his own posture was tranquil, alarmingly so, if not for his size and presence.
"There is no supposition upon your sovereignty, Telnarsis."
Kazas spun the massive hammer in his hands with a short, blurred twist before bringing it up to rest against his shoulder.
"Nor should there be upon mine."
The crouched dragon fused his eyes upon the Dwarven King, constraining his breath to violent bursts.
You entreat me with ploys of insignificance, doubting my discernment. This night has been a predictable dwarven snare.
"That is not the truth,"
Kazas offered.
The truth is as I see it.
Telnarsis' eye flashed on me and held my gaze.
And so shall it be in the eyes of every last rivalrine upon Nistirok. Every watcher, ender, protector, devourer, and even the Rainborn themselves shall cover the sky and ground like the all-consuming breath of the Dragon King. When word goes forth that an inquisitive, ignorant human has his wretched fingers clutched around even a copy of Roknelthamos' signet tongue, the empire of his people will be turned to ash and bone to retrieve it.
His tongue sloshed in thick, dripping saliva within the carriage of his teeth. His eyes returned to Kazas.
And thus shall it be visited upon by every race who availed him in this ignominious pursuit.
I confess this tirade reduced me to quivering, and I knelt against the passage wall in ardent supplication. With closed eyes, I merely waited for either of these great beings to loose the first strike. Yet the contrary came swiftly.
"Oh, You shall raise alarm amongst the dragons.
Kazas's ease remained invincible.
Tell me, Narcissus, have you regarded your place among them?
At this riposte, the beast winced, and something inside him healed, briefly.
I wonder if they will perceive the quality of your intentions this night as favorably as we have.
Whatever knowledge Kazas spoke from, the effect of these words wore heavily on the dragon. Telnassus said nothing for a moment, then with a sudden heaviness, drew back up the frosted steps of his disrepaired dwelling.
Depart, dwarf, while I still harbor restraint.
Kazas lowered his head slightly to acknowledge. He slid back the hammer to its hold and pulled his cloak back over the crown of his head. In a moment, it all seemed to be finished. Yet in one last outreach, Kazas turned in reconciliation.
It was never my intention to address you so, Telnarcissus. I shall not boast of it.
Fury woke again, manifesting in a terrifying blaze from the mouth of the serpent.
Enough,
he roared. In turn, we committed ourselves to a swift journey back down the stone passage, and the dragon's final words chased after us.
Never again will I permit your miserable kind to trespass my lands, dwarf. May the coming plague swallow you whole.
I ran at dangerous speed down the caves, but never hesitated. Soon we found ourselves at the foot of the cliffs, once more in sight of the night and snow. I burst through the doorway, gasping for breath, though my lungs burned from the cold. I was just permitting myself to feel safe. Then I noticed the blood everywhere. Pools of old blood and one fresh river flowing to me. But the stench was vile and unlike the sticky metallic scent of a slaughterhouse. I looked up, aghast, and saw Relsiren, his face to the cliffs with the obsidian sword on his shoulder, dripping wet. He was silent until Kazas exited, then cleaned and sheathed his weapon, confessing,
"We have no more time."
As I stood, I saw the bodies, 3 of them, split open in various ways and one severed cleanly in half. These creatures looked human, but yet strangely withered, like all water had been drained out of their corpse. Their armor was light, weapons heinous yet sleek. Their arms and legs bore wrappings of wet cloth. Disregarding the dead entirely, Kazas was looking to the cliffs as he strode past me.
"The Hill Watcher,"
he whispered. Standing before the wide disk of the moon was a silhouette. Even high upon the cliffs, he appeared a menacing version of these 3 assailants at our feet. Yet about him emanated a distortion, like that of extreme heat. It made the moon itself seem to shake. His arms were folded and he stared down at us, unflinching. In his face burned 2 eyes of black flame, but with a tainted greenish hue, indeed giving the color of a pale, ill appearance. He spoke a word that started like a whisper, but ended in a scream. After a few seconds of observation, he turned away and disappeared over the cliffs. The moon regained its composure.
"He is prodding us,"
Relsiren commented, just then letting his gaze slip back down to us.
"They are not ready for war. Not on our lands."
"No," Kazas replied.
"But neither, I fear, are we."
At this, we departed out from under the shadow of the watching eyes in the cliffs, back to the snows, the boat, and Kadasa. Of that journey, I have informed no one but you, Kaelian, and of Kazas I permit myself to give only the most discreet, knowing glances, though he has not been seen in Kadasa for nearly a week, as I'm told. What these events mean for our guest, I am not certain, though I am all more convinced it is vital in every regard, and commit to you its continued safekeeping. Be warned and encouraged, friend. Narian Castigue.
474 IH.